It was the middle of a scorching July, and Zach, Ben, Matt, and Noah had finally managed to get together for their annual summer camping trip. Every year, they'd pick a remote location, far from city lights and noise, a place where they could escape the buzz of everyday life. This year, Zach suggested Hawthorne Lake, an isolated spot that was barely a dot on the map, deep within the forests of the Pacific Northwest. Legend had it that Hawthorne Lake was cursed, abandoned decades ago due to a string of unexplained disappearances. To them, this was the perfect spot. "Did you bring the map, Zach?" Matt asked as they stood by their truck, laden with gear. "Of course," Zach replied with a grin, patting his backpack. "But don't worry, just follow the trail, and we'll reach it by afternoon." They hiked through the dense woods, their laughter and conversation filling the quiet of the forest. Noah, the history buff among them, took every chance to remind the others of the lake's eerie past. "You know, they say Hawthorne Lake swallowed people whole. Back in the 60s, they were building cabins around it, but construction stopped after half the workers vanished without a trace." Ben chuckled, shaking his head. "Come on, Noah. It's just an old story, probably meant to keep kids from sneaking out here." After a few hours, they arrived. The lake was vast, stretching as far as the eye could see, encircled by tall pine trees. Mist floated on the water's surface, giving the place an otherworldly feel. They set up camp near the shore, taking in the tranquility of their surroundings. Everything felt so peaceful that they almost forgot the stories. As evening fell, they gathered around a small campfire, talking and reminiscing about high school memories and past trips. The fire crackled, casting a warm glow, while the lake remained still, reflecting the darkening sky. "Let's do something different this time," Zach proposed. "A midnight swim. Who's up for it?" "Are you serious?" Noah asked, glancing uneasily at the lake. Ben rolled his eyes. "Come on, Noah. It's just water. I'm in." With a mixture of laughter and nervousness, they made their way to the shore, stripping down to their swim trunks. The water was colder than they expected, but the thrill of the experience spurred them on. They splashed around, challenging each other to swim further, laughing as they tried to push each other under the water. But as they swam, Ben noticed something unusual beneath him. "Guys, there's something down there," he said, treading water. "Probably just rocks," Matt replied, brushing it off. "No, really, it looked like something shiny," Ben insisted. Intrigued, they all took a breath and dove down. The water was surprisingly clear, and about 15 feet below, they saw it, a metallic glint, partially buried in the lake bed. They surfaced, gasping. "Did you see that?" Zach exclaimed, his voice filled with excitement. They dove back down, working together to uncover whatever was hidden. After a few tries, they managed to loosen it, finally dragging it to the surface. It was an old, rusted metal chest, small enough to carry, but heavy. "What do you think's inside?" Noah asked, his eyes wide with anticipation. "Only one way to find out," Ben replied, dragging the chest onto the shore. They gathered around it, dripping wet, each of them feeling the weight of excitement and mystery in the air. They pried it open, and inside was a strange assortment of items: a few small metal boxes, a dusty leather-bound notebook, and a map almost identical to the one Zach had brought. However, this map was marked with strange symbols, with an X not far from their current spot. Matt picked up the notebook, carefully opening it. The first few pages were sketches of the lake and surrounding forest, but as he flipped further, they saw increasingly frantic notes, scrawled in messy handwriting. "The lake calls. The shadows move at night. I hear them whisper." The entries grew more chaotic, talking of strange sounds and eerie sightings in the woods. The final entry, written in shaky letters, read, "They come for those who trespass." A heavy silence fell over them. "Okay," Noah said. Maybe this wasn't such a great idea. But Zach, always the adventurous one, was hooked. "Guys, this is the kind of thing people dream of finding. The lake's probably hiding all kinds of secrets. and we've got a map leading to something nearby. Ben glanced at the fading sunlight. We'll check it out in the morning. No sense getting lost in the dark. That night, as they lay in their tents, the weight of what they'd found weighed on their minds. The lake, once tranquil, now seemed filled with hidden depths and mysteries. The sounds of the forest seemed louder, the shadows darker. Each of them lay awake longer than usual, trying to shake off an inexplicable sense of unease. The next morning, they studied the map over breakfast. The marked spot was a short hike from their camp, just beyond a grove of trees on the eastern side of the lake. They packed lightly, bringing along only essentials, leaving the rest of their gear behind. The hike was quiet, their usual chatter replaced by a focused silence. The air felt thicker, charged with the tension of the unknown. Finally, they arrived at the spot, a clearing surrounded by ancient trees, their roots twisted and gnarled. In the middle of the clearing stood a stone altar, weathered and covered in moss. It looked out of place, almost as if it had been forgotten by time itself. On the altar was a small carved stone with symbols that matched the ones on the map. "This feels wrong," Noah said, his voice barely a whisper. Ignoring him, Zach stepped forward, brushing dirt off the stone, revealing more symbols carved into its surface. As he did, the wind picked up, rustling the trees and sending a chill through them all. Ben knelt beside the stone, running his fingers over the carvings. "These look ancient. Do you think it was some kind of ritual site?" "Maybe," Matt replied. "But what for?" Just then, a low hum filled the air. It started as a faint vibration, but quickly grew louder, pulsing through the ground beneath their feet. The trees around them swayed, and the lake, visible through the trees, rippled as though disturbed by an unseen force. "Guys, I don't like this," Noah said, stepping back. But Zach was transfixed, his eyes glued to the stone. "Wait, it's like it's calling to us." Suddenly, the humming stopped, and in its place, a voice echoed around them, low, whispering, impossible to locate. It was a language none of them recognized, yet it filled them with an overwhelming dread. "Time to go," Ben said, his voice shaking. They backed away slowly, but the voice grew louder, seeming to fill their minds. Shadows moved at the edge of the clearing, shapes that weren't quite human, twisting and shifting in the corners of their vision. Finally, they broke into a run, sprinting back toward their camp. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees reaching out like grasping hands. Heart pounding, they stumbled onto the lakeshore, gasping for breath. Without a word, they packed up their camp, adrenaline fueling their movements. As they loaded their gear back into the truck, they shared uneasy glances, each silently agreeing that they'd seen enough. As they drove away, Zach looked back at the lake one last time. It was still, as if nothing had happened, the morning mist rising gently from its surface. Back in the city, they never spoke of that day again. They went on with their lives, the memories fading over time. But each of them carried a sense of Hawthorne Lake's mysteries and the strange call of the stone, something they couldn't quite explain. Years later, when they were together again, Ben finally broke the silence. "You ever wonder what would have happened if we stayed?" Zach shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "Sometimes. But some things are better left forgotten." And with that, they left Hawthorne Lake behind them, its secrets and whispers swallowed once more by the depths of the forest. Every summer, 3 friends, Adam, Jackson, and Leo, would spend the last week of August at Riley's Peak, a remote mountain cabin that Jackson's grandfather had left behind. It was a tradition they had carried since high school, a way to hold on to their youth before life demanded more of them. This year, however, was different. With college graduation around the corner, each of them felt the weight of an uncertain future pressing down on them. Adam was the first to arrive, parking his old truck by the cabin and taking in the familiar surroundings. The cabin was nestled deep in the mountains, the nearest town an hour away by car. Pine trees loomed high, casting long shadows over the clearing, and a cool breeze swept down from the peak, ruffling his hair. Jackson arrived next, with Leo trailing behind him in his car. They greeted each other with the usual backslaps and easy smiles, their excitement for the trip clear despite their shared apprehensions about the future. "Another year, another week at Riley's," Jackson said, giving the cabin a fond look. "Can't believe it's our last summer here." "Don't say that," Leo protested. "Who says it has to be our last?" Adam chuckled. "You know how life is. We're all going different directions soon enough." Jackson shrugged. "Well, let's make it count then. One last epic week." They unloaded their gear and settled into the cabin, which had changed little over the years. Inside, it was rustic but comfortable, with worn wooden floors, a small kitchen, and a stone fireplace. They each claimed their usual spots, falling back into old rhythms as they joked, planned hikes, and reminisced. That night, as they gathered around a campfire outside the cabin, Jackson shared something he'd kept secret. "Guys, there's something I found in my grandpa's journal," he said, his voice low. "Something about Riley's Peak." Leo raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Well," Jackson said, glancing over his shoulder as though checking for unseen listeners, "my grandpa mentioned something about a hidden cave at the top of the peak. Supposedly it's not just a cave. He wrote that there's something unusual up there." Adam leaned forward, intrigued. "Unusual how?" Jackson shrugged. "I don't know. He didn't say much, just that it was a place he visited once and never again. Said it held secrets that should stay forgotten." Leo scoffed. "Come on, that sounds like something out of a movie." Jackson laughed. "Probably, but it got me curious, you know. I think we should try to find it." Adam nodded. "What do we have to lose? Let's go for it." The three agreed to hike to the peak the next morning. As the fire crackled and sparks floated into the night sky, an air of mystery and excitement filled the clearing. Each of them couldn't shake the feeling that this hike would be unlike any they had taken before. The next morning, they set off early, the first rays of sunlight illuminating the dense forest. Jackson led the way, guided by a vague memory of his grandfather's notes. The hike was steep and challenging, the trail winding higher with each step. Birds chirped overhead, and the scent of pine filled the air as they climbed, each lost in his own thoughts. After a few hours, they reached a rocky outcropping near the peak. Jackson paused, squinting as he scanned the terrain. "This should be it," he murmured. "According to my grandpa, the entrance to the cave is hidden around here somewhere." They spread out, combing the area in silence. It wasn't long before Leo called out, "Over here, I think I found something." The others joined him to find a narrow opening, barely visible behind a thick curtain of ivy. Jackson stepped forward, brushing the ivy aside to reveal a dark passage sloping downward into the mountain. "Looks like this is it," he said, a hint of trepidation in his voice. They hesitated, exchanging nervous glances, but curiosity won out, and one by one they squeezed through the entrance, turning on their flashlights as they ventured deeper into the cave. The air grew colder as they descended, the light from the entrance quickly fading behind them. The passage opened up into a larger chamber, and as their flashlight beams swept across the walls, they noticed strange carvings etched into the stone. Symbols and patterns, some geometric, others almost animalistic, covered the walls, each one more intricate than the last. Adam reached out, running his hand over one of the carvings. "What do you think this means?" Jackson shook his head. "I have no idea. My grandpa never mentioned anything like this." They explored further, moving cautiously through the cavernous space. At the far end of the chamber, they discovered a large stone pedestal with an object resting on it. It was an old, weathered box, carved from dark wood and wrapped in worn leather straps. Leo raised an eyebrow. "Is this what your grandpa meant by secrets?" Jackson nodded, swallowing hard. Must be. Without thinking, he reached out and lifted the box. It was heavier than he expected, the weight almost unnatural. He slowly opened the lid, revealing a small, intricately carved stone, no bigger than the palm of his hand. It was shaped like an eye, with a single gem in the center that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. "What is that?" Adam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jackson turned the stone over in his hand, feeling an odd warmth radiating from it. "I don't know, but it feels alive, somehow." As he held it, a deep rumble echoed through the cave, and the ground beneath them began to shake. Dust and pebbles fell from the ceiling, and they staggered back in alarm. "Put it back!" Leo shouted, fear evident in his eyes. Jackson quickly placed the stone back in the box and closed the lid. The rumbling ceased, and the cave fell silent once more. They exchanged glances, each of them breathing heavily. Adam spoke first. "I don't know what that thing is, but I don't want to find out. Let's get out of here." They made their way back up the passage, adrenaline propelling them forward. As they emerged into the sunlight, they felt an overwhelming sense of relief, the warmth and brightness washing away the oppressive darkness of the cave. But as they descended the mountain, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. Shadows seemed to move at the edge of their vision, and the forest was eerily silent, as if holding its breath. That night, back at the cabin, they sat around the fire in silence. The experience had left them all shaken, and no one seemed eager to bring it up. But finally, Jackson spoke. "My grandpa was right," he said quietly. "Some secrets really should stay forgotten." Leo nodded. "I don't know what that stone was, but it didn't feel natural." Adam leaned back, gazing at the stars above. "You know, I've always thought there was more to this place than we realized. Maybe some things are better left alone." They spent the rest of the week at Riley's Peak, but the carefree spirit of their previous trips was gone. The weight of what they'd discovered lingered over them, casting a shadow on their last summer together. As they packed up to leave, Jackson took one last look at the mountain. He couldn't help but feel a sense of loss, as if he'd left a piece of himself behind in that cave. They said their goodbyes, promising to keep in touch and meet again someday, though they all knew it might never happen. Years passed, and life took them in different directions. But each of them carried the memory of Riley's Peak, a mystery that remained unanswered, a story they could never quite share. In the quiet moments of their lives, they would sometimes find themselves wondering about the stone in the cave, about the secrets it held, and the price of curiosity. In time, Riley's Peak became a distant memory, the details blurred by years and distance. But whenever they looked up at the stars, they couldn't shake the feeling that some mysteries are better left in the shadows, hidden away in the depths of forgotten places.